I'm sitting in my apartment right now, 2 days after walking out of my sister's wedding reception, and I still can't believe what happened. My name is Noah. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a project manager at a manufacturing company in Denver. For the past 8 years, I've been the dependable one in my family, the guy who helps everyone move, who loans money that never gets paid back, who shows up for every birthday and holiday without fail. My younger sister Chelsea is 26, and she's always been the princess of the family. I don't mean that in a cute way. I mean my parents have literally treated her like royalty since we were kids, excusing every irresponsible decision, every tantrum, every time she quit a job because her manager was mean or her coworkers weren't nice enough. Meanwhile, I was the one who had to figure everything out on my own because I was the oldest, and apparently that meant I didn't need support or encouragement. Growing up, the difference in how we were treated was pretty obvious, but I told myself it didn't matter. My parents helped Chelsea with her rent when she moved out at 23, bought her a car when hers broke down, paid for her community college classes that she never finished. When I was 23, I was working 2 jobs to afford my studio apartment and eating ramen most nights because I was trying to save money. Did my parents offer to help? Once. My dad gave me $100 and told me I needed to learn to budget better. I never asked them for money again after that. It wasn't worth the lecture that came with it. But I'm not bitter about it, or at least I wasn't. I accepted a long time ago that Chelsea needed more help than I did, that she wasn't as capable of handling life on her own. My mom always said Chelsea was more sensitive, more emotional, and needed extra support. Fine, whatever. I learned to be independent, and honestly, I'm proud of what I've built for myself. 6 months ago, I got promoted to senior project manager. It came with a significant raise, about $20,000 more a year, plus better benefits and a performance bonus structure. I was thrilled. I'd been working toward this position for 3 years, putting in extra hours, taking on difficult projects, building relationships with clients. When I told my family about the promotion at Sunday dinner, my mom hugged me and said she was proud. My dad shook my hand and said good job, and Chelsea smiled and said congratulations. It felt nice. It felt like maybe, for once, they were genuinely happy about my success without any qualifiers or comparisons. I should have known better. 2 weeks after I told them about my promotion, Chelsea announced her engagement to her boyfriend Derek. They'd been dating for about 1.5 years, and honestly, I didn't know Derek that well. He seemed nice enough, worked in sales for some company I'd never heard of, drove a flashy car that I suspected was leased. Chelsea was over the moon, posting engagement photos every day, planning her dream wedding, talking about venues and dresses and flower arrangements. My mom was equally obsessed, calling me multiple times a week to tell me about decorations they'd picked out or how beautiful Chelsea was going to look. I was happy for Chelsea, I really was. She seemed genuinely in love, and Derek treated her well from what I could see. I told her I'd be there for whatever she needed, that I was honored to be her brother, and I'd support her however I could. I meant it. Despite everything, despite the favoritism and the inequality, Chelsea was still my sister. When she asked me to be in the wedding party, I said yes immediately. She wanted me to walk our grandmother down the aisle and then sit in the front row with the family. Not a groomsman exactly, but still a visible role. I was fine with that. I bought a new suit, arranged to take time off work, and committed to being present for all the pre-wedding events. The engagement period was 6 months, which my mom said was quick, but Chelsea insisted she didn't want to wait. She wanted a fall wedding, wanted the photos with the changing leaves, wanted everything to be perfect before the end of the year. My parents agreed to pay for most of the wedding, which I knew was a huge financial undertaking for them. My dad is a retired electrician, and my mom works part-time at a dental office. They're comfortable, but not wealthy by any means. Still, they wanted to give Chelsea her dream wedding, and I understood that. Parents want to do special things for their kids. What I didn't understand, and what started to bother me as the months went on, was how frequently my family brought up my promotion in relation to Chelsea's wedding. It started small. My mom would say things like, "It's so nice that Noah's doing well now. He can really help out if we need anything." Or my dad would mention, "Noah got that big raise, so he's in a good position to chip in." At first, I thought they just meant emotionally or logistically, like maybe they'd need help setting up the venue or moving decorations. I was totally willing to do that kind of stuff. But then Chelsea started making comments too. She'd say things like, "You're going to give me an amazing wedding gift, right?" since you can actually afford it now." She'd laugh when she said it, like it was a joke, but there was an edge to it. An expectation. I brushed it off because I figured she was just excited and maybe a little stressed about the wedding planning. Brides get stressed. That's normal. I'd already decided to give her a generous gift anyway, probably around $500, which was more than I'd typically spend, but I wanted to do something nice. About 2 months before the wedding, my mom called me and asked if I could come over for dinner. She said she wanted to talk about family stuff and that it would be good for all of us to be on the same page. I figured it was about the wedding timeline, or maybe they wanted to discuss the rehearsal dinner details. I showed up that Friday evening, and my dad, Mom, Chelsea, and Derek were all sitting in the living room looking weirdly serious. My stomach dropped a little because the energy felt off. My mom was smiling, but it was that tight smile she does when she's about to ask for something she knows is unreasonable. She offered me a beer, which I accepted, and we all sat down. There was this awkward silence for a minute where everyone just looked at each other, and then my mom cleared her throat and said they wanted to talk to me about helping with the wedding. I said sure, whatever they needed, I was happy to help. That's when Chelsea jumped in and said that she and Derek had been working on their honeymoon plans, and they'd found the perfect trip to Hawaii. 2 weeks, fancy resort, the whole deal. She pulled out her phone and started showing me pictures of this beautiful beachfront property with infinity pools and spa services. I nodded along, saying it looked amazing, she deserved it, all the usual supportive brother stuff. Then Derek spoke up and said the trip was going to cost about $8,000 total for the two of them. He said it was a bit more than they'd originally budgeted, but it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and they really wanted to do it right. I agreed. Told them they should absolutely take the trip if they could make it work. That's when things got weird. My mom said that's where I came in. She said that since I'd just gotten my promotion and raise, and since I was doing so well financially, it would be wonderful if I could help contribute to their honeymoon as my wedding gift. She said it would mean so much to Chelsea, and it would be a way for me to really show my support as her older brother. I sat there for a second, processing what she'd just said. She wasn't asking me to chip in a couple $100. She was asking me to fund a significant portion of an $8,000 vacation. I tried to stay calm and said that I'd already planned to give them a nice gift, but I wasn't in a position to cover thousands of dollars for their honeymoon. I explained that while I did get a raise, I also had my own expenses, my own savings goals, and I'd already spent money on the suit and taken time off work for the wedding. Chelsea's face fell immediately. She looked at Derek, then at my mom, then back at me. She said she thought I'd want to do this for her, that family helps family, and that she'd been counting on me. I felt this weird guilt creeping in, which I know now was exactly what they wanted. My dad chimed in and said it didn't have to be the full amount, that even $3,000 or $4,000 would make a huge difference. $3,000 or $4,000. Said so casually, like it was pocket change. I told them I appreciated that they thought of me, but I couldn't commit to that kind of expense. I offered again to give them a generous cash gift, maybe even push it to $1,000, but I couldn't fund their honeymoon. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Chelsea got quiet and tearful, saying she understood, but she was disappointed. My mom looked hurt, like I'd personally offended her. Derek just sat there looking uncomfortable. My dad said they'd figure it out and change the subject, but the damage was done. I left that night feeling like the bad guy, even though logically I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. $1,000 wedding gift was already extremely generous, more than most people give. But somehow, they'd made me feel cheap. Over the next few weeks leading up to the wedding, there was this tension every time I talked to my family. My mom would make passive-aggressive comments about how tight money was and how they were trying to make everything work for Chelsea's special day. Chelsea stopped texting me as much, and when she did, her messages were short and cold. I tried to shake it off and focus on being supportive in other ways. I helped my dad pick up the tuxedos. I drove my grandmother to her dress fitting. I showed up for the rehearsal dinner and gave a toast about how happy I was for Chelsea and Derek. I was trying to be the good brother, the good son, despite feeling like I'd been unfairly villainized for not bankrolling their vacation. The wedding day itself was beautiful, I have to admit. Chelsea looked stunning in her dress. The venue was decorated perfectly with white roses and fairy lights, and the ceremony was touching. I walked my grandmother down the aisle like I was supposed to, sat in the front row, and clapped and smiled through the whole thing. During the cocktail hour, I made small talk with relatives, congratulated Chelsea and Derek multiple times, and tried to just enjoy the celebration. The reception started off normally. Dinner was served, speeches were made, people danced. I was actually having a decent time, talking to my cousin about his new job and catching up with an uncle I hadn't seen in a while. I'd almost forgotten about the whole honeymoon funding drama. Almost. Then, about 2 hours into the reception, right after the cake cutting, the DJ handed the microphone to Chelsea. I figured she was going to do a thank you speech or maybe announce the bouquet toss. Instead, she stood there in her wedding dress, beaming at the crowd, and said she had a special announcement to make. She thanked everyone for coming, said how much it meant to have all of her loved ones there, and then her eyes landed on me. My stomach dropped. She said that family was the most important thing in the world to her, and that she was so blessed to have a brother like me who was always there to support her. People started clapping, and I felt my face get hot. I knew something was coming. I could feel it. She went on to say that I'd recently gotten a big promotion at work, and that because I was such a generous and loving brother, I'd offered to cover the honeymoon expenses for her and Derek as my wedding gift. The room erupted in applause. People were turning to look at me, smiling, giving me thumbs up. My cousin patted me on the back. An aunt called out, "That's so sweet." I sat there frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Chelsea was still talking, saying how grateful she was, how this honeymoon was going to be the trip of a lifetime thanks to me. She mentioned that the total cost was about $12,000 because they'd decided to extend the trip and upgrade some of the accommodations, and that my contribution meant the world to them. $12,000. Not 8. 12. And I hadn't agreed to pay a single cent of it. I looked around for my parents and spotted them at the head table. My mom was smiling and clapping along with everyone else. My dad was nodding approvingly. They knew. They absolutely knew this was happening, and they'd let Chelsea announce it publicly, in front of 150 people, without confirming with me first. I felt like I was going to be sick. Before I could even stand up or figure out what to say, my dad got up from his seat and started walking toward me. He had a manila folder in his hand. People were still clapping and cheering as he approached my table. He leaned down, put his hand on my shoulder in this weird performative gesture of father-son pride, and handed me the folder. He said quietly, but loud enough for nearby tables to hear, that he'd put together all the honeymoon details and payment information to make it easy for me. I opened the folder. Inside was a printed invoice from a travel agency. The total at the bottom read $12,347. There were line items for flights, hotel accommodations, resort fees, excursion packages, travel insurance. My name was listed at the top as the payer. Below the invoice was a sticky note in my mom's handwriting that said, "Payment due by next Friday. Thank you for being such a wonderful brother. We're so proud of you." I stared at it for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds. The applause was dying down, and people were starting to return to their conversations. Chelsea was handing the microphone back to the DJ. Derek was hugging her and kissing her cheek. Everyone looked so happy, so grateful, so expectant, and I realized in that moment that this had been planned all along. The dinner at my parents' house 2 months ago wasn't a request. It was a test to see if I'd volunteer the money. When I didn't, they moved to Plan B, which was to publicly commit me to paying by announcing it at the wedding where I couldn't say no without causing a massive scene and ruining Chelsea's day. They'd trapped me. They'd actually sat down and strategized about how to manipulate me into funding a $12,000 vacation, and they decided that public humiliation and social pressure was the way to do it. My hands started shaking. I closed the folder and looked up at my dad. He was still standing there, smiling, waiting for me to say something. I could feel dozens of eyes on me from nearby tables. People were probably expecting me to get up and hug Chelsea, to make some kind of gracious statement about how happy I was to do this for her. Instead, I stood up slowly, folder in hand, and I walked toward the exit. Not fast, not running, just walking. I heard my mom call my name from across the room. I kept walking. I heard my dad say, "Noah, wait," but I didn't stop. I pushed through the double doors of the reception hall and stepped out into the cool October evening. My heart was pounding in my chest. I made it to my car, got in, and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to go back in and confront them, to walk up to the microphone and tell everyone the truth, that I'd never agreed to this, that I'd been ambushed and manipulated. But I knew that would only make things worse. It would ruin Chelsea's wedding, make me look like the bad guy who couldn't just be generous, and my family would never forgive me for causing a scene. So instead, I drove home. And I walked into my apartment, and I sat on my couch still wearing my suit, staring at the invoice that my dad had handed me like it was some kind of gift. Like he was doing me a favor by organizing the details of my involuntary financial obligation. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept replaying the whole thing in my mind, trying to figure out how it had gotten to this point. How had my own family decided it was acceptable to publicly volunteer me to pay $12,000 without my consent? How did they think this was okay? Around 3 in the morning, my phone started buzzing. Text messages. Dozens of them. I picked up my phone and started scrolling. Messages from my mom asking where I went and why I left. Messages from Chelsea asking if I was okay and saying she hoped I wasn't upset. Messages from my dad saying we needed to talk. Messages from relatives congratulating me on being such a generous brother. Messages from my aunt saying how wonderful it was that I was taking care of my sister. Every single person seemed to think I'd actually agreed to this, that I was on board, that this was my idea. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I opened my text conversation with my mom and I typed out a message. I said I never agreed to pay for the honeymoon, that I was blindsided at the reception, and that what they did was manipulative and unfair. I hit send and waited. The 3 dots appeared immediately. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, a message came through. She said she was sorry I felt that way, but that family helps family, and she thought I'd be happy to do this for my sister. She said Chelsea had been so excited thinking I was going to help, and that my walking out had upset her on her wedding day. She said I should think about what kind of brother I wanted to be, and that my dad had worked hard to put together that payment plan to make it easier for me. Not once did she acknowledge that they'd announced this publicly without my permission. Not once did she admit that this was wrong. It was all about how I'd disappointed them, how I'd hurt Chelsea, how I wasn't being the family member I should be. I didn't respond. I put my phone on silent and I tried to get some sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. The next day was Sunday, and normally I'd go over to my parents' house for our weekly family dinner. I didn't go. I stayed home and I started going through my finances, trying to figure out if paying this invoice would even be possible. With my raise, I was making about $75,000 a year before taxes. After taxes, rent, car payment, utilities, groceries, and my student loan payments, I had maybe $1,000 a month that I could save or use for discretionary spending. $12,000 was an entire year of savings. It was the emergency fund I'd been building. It was the down payment I'd been putting together for a house. It was my financial security, and they were asking me to hand it over like it was nothing. I knew I couldn't do it. Even if I wanted to, even if I felt morally obligated, I literally couldn't afford to pay $12,000 without derailing my own financial plans and potentially putting myself in a dangerous situation if any emergency came up. But beyond the finances, it was the principle. They hadn't asked. They'd told. They'd announced it publicly, created social pressure, and expected me to fall in line. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I thought about all the times I'd helped them over the years. The time I loaned Chelsea $2,000 to cover her rent when she lost her job, money she never paid back. The time I spent an entire weekend helping my parents install new flooring in their house. The time I drove 4 hours to pick up my mom from the airport because my dad was busy. I'd been the reliable one my entire life, and this was how they treated me. Like an ATM. Like my success existed solely to benefit them. By Monday morning, my phone was full of more messages. Chelsea had texted me saying she was hurt and confused about why I left. She said she thought I'd be happy to see everyone celebrating my generosity. She said Derek was confused too, and that they were counting on me. My dad texted saying he needed to talk to me in person. My mom texted saying she loved me, but she was disappointed in my behavior. I ignored all of them. I went to work and I tried to focus on my job, but I couldn't concentrate. During my lunch break, I called my best friend Tyler and told him everything. He was silent for a long moment after I finished, and then he said, "Dude, that's insane. You know that's insane, right?" It was validating to hear someone else say it. Tyler said I needed to set boundaries, that I needed to make it clear I wasn't paying and that what they did was wrong. He said if they couldn't respect that, then I needed to distance myself. I knew he was right, but the thought of actually confronting my family made me feel sick. That evening, I sat down and wrote out a long text message. I addressed it to the family group chat that included my parents and Chelsea. I explained calmly but firmly that I had never agreed to pay for the honeymoon, that I was hurt and blindsided by the public announcement, and that I would not be making any payment toward their trip. I said I loved them, but that what they'd done was manipulative and disrespectful of my boundaries and my finances. I said I hoped we could move past this, but that I needed them to understand my position. I read it over 3 times before I hit send. The response was immediate. My phone started ringing. My mom. I didn't answer. It rang again. My dad. I didn't answer. Then Chelsea. I didn't answer. Text messages started flooding in. My mom said I was being selfish and that I was breaking Chelsea's heart. My dad said I'd made a commitment and I needed to honor it. Chelsea said she couldn't believe I would do this to her, that I'd humiliated her by walking out of her wedding, and now I was going back on my word. Going back on my word. As if I'd ever given my word in the first place. I turned my phone off. I couldn't deal with it anymore. That night, I barely ate dinner. I sat in my apartment alone, wondering if I was the crazy one. Wondering if maybe I should just pay the money to keep the peace, to avoid being the family villain. But then I'd remember the look on my dad's face when he handed me that invoice, the expectant smile, the assumption that I'd just comply. And I'd get angry all over again. Tuesday came and went with no contact. I turned my phone back on, but I didn't respond to any messages. I figured maybe they needed time to cool off, to realize what they'd done. Wednesday morning, I was getting ready for work when someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and my heart sank. It was my mom. She was standing in the hallway, and she looked like she'd been crying. I stood there for a minute, debating whether to open the door. Another knock. Noah, I know you're in there. Please, I need to talk to you. Her voice was shaking. I took a deep breath and opened the door. She immediately stepped forward like she was going to hug me, but I stepped back. I asked her what she was doing here. She said she'd been trying to reach me for 2 days, and she was worried. She said we needed to talk about everything, that the family was falling apart. I let her come in, but I didn't offer her coffee or a seat. I just stood there in my kitchen, arms crossed, waiting. She looked around my apartment like she was searching for the right words, and then she started crying again. She said Chelsea was devastated, that I'd ruined her wedding by leaving, and now I was ruining her honeymoon by refusing to help. She said my dad was furious with me, that he couldn't believe I'd embarrassed the family like this. She said relatives were asking questions about what happened, why I left, whether the honeymoon gift was still happening. I let her finish, and then I asked her a simple question. I asked her when, exactly, I had agreed to pay $12,000 for Chelsea's honeymoon. She opened her mouth and then closed it. She said I hadn't explicitly said yes, but that they thought I'd be willing to help given my promotion. I asked her why they would announce it publicly without confirming with me first. She said Chelsea was so excited and they didn't want to ruin the surprise. The surprise. They didn't want to ruin the surprise of me finding out I was expected to pay $12,000. I told her that what they did was wrong, that it was manipulative, and that I wasn't going to pay. She started crying harder and said I was tearing the family apart, that I was being selfish, that Chelsea needed this honeymoon to start her marriage off right. I felt something snap inside me. I told her that I'd been the reliable one my entire life, that I'd helped everyone in this family multiple times, and that the one time I set a boundary, I was being called selfish. I told her that my money was my money, that my promotion didn't make me responsible for funding Chelsea's lifestyle, and that I was done being treated like I existed to serve everyone else. My mom looked at me like I'd slapped her. She said she didn't realize I felt this way, that she thought I was happy to help family. I told her there was a difference between helping and being exploited. She didn't have a response to that. She just stood there crying, and I felt this awful mix of guilt and anger and sadness. Finally, she said she'd talk to my dad and Chelsea, that maybe they could figure something else out. But then she added that I should know this would change our relationship, that what I was doing would have consequences. It sounded like a threat. I told her that was her choice. I opened the door and waited for her to leave. She walked out without saying goodbye, and I closed the door behind her. My hands were shaking again. I sat down on my couch and I realized that this was it. This was the moment where I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be. Was I going to cave to the pressure and pay the money to preserve family peace? Or was I going to stand my ground and accept that my relationship with my family might never be the same? I thought about my promotion, about how hard I'd worked for it, about the years of grinding and sacrifice. I thought about the life I wanted to build for myself, the house I wanted to buy, the financial security I wanted to have. And I thought about Chelsea and my parents, about the years of being taken for granted, about how this moment was really just the culmination of a lifetime of being expected to give while she was expected to receive. I pulled out my phone and I blocked all of them. My mom, my dad, Chelsea. I blocked their numbers. I blocked them on social media. I sent one final text to the group chat before I did, saying that I loved them, but I needed space and that I would not be discussing the honeymoon payment anymore. Then I blocked the group chat too. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. That was 2 days ago. I've been sitting here ever since, trying to process everything, trying to figure out what comes next. I don't know if I did the right thing. Part of me feels guilty, like maybe I should have just paid and kept the peace. But a bigger part of me feels free. Free from the expectation that I have to sacrifice my own well-being to make everyone else happy. Free from being the family doormat. I know this isn't over. I know there will be more confrontations, more pressure, more guilt trips. But right now, in this moment, I'm just trying to sit with my decision and figure out how to move forward. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about setting boundaries with family. They don't just accept it and move on. They escalate. 3 days after I blocked everyone, my uncle showed up at my apartment. Apparently my mom had called half the family, spinning the story to make me look like the villain who abandoned his sister on her wedding day. My uncle tried the whole family is everything speech, but I stood firm. I told him the truth, that I never agreed to pay, that they ambushed me publicly, and that $12,000 was a full year of my savings. He looked uncomfortable and left without pushing further. Then the Facebook post started. Chelsea posted a long, tearful message about how her honeymoon was in jeopardy because of unexpected circumstances and how heartbroken she was. The comments were full of sympathy and offers to contribute to a GoFundMe she'd set up. I felt sick reading it, but I didn't engage. A few family members reached out to me privately after seeing the post, asking for my side. I explained everything. The lack of consent, the public ambush, the invoice. Most of them were shocked. My cousin Jessica even said she'd always noticed how differently Chelsea and I were treated. The turning point came 2 weeks later. My Aunt Linda, my dad's sister who's always been the no-nonsense type, called me. She said she'd talked to my parents and gotten the full story from them, and she wanted me to know that what they did was absolutely unacceptable. She said she'd told my dad he should be ashamed of himself for trying to manipulate me like that. Apparently, she also posted in the comments of Chelsea's GoFundMe explaining that the unexpected circumstances were that Chelsea had announced a gift that was never agreed to. The post came down within an hour. Chelsea and Derek ended up going on a modest honeymoon to Mexico instead of Hawaii. They paid for it themselves with money from their actual wedding gifts and some help from my parents. I heard through the grapevine that my mom was furious with Aunt Linda for interfering and that there was tension at Thanksgiving, which I didn't attend. It's been 4 months now. I haven't spoken to my parents or Chelsea since that day my mom came to my apartment. I've had coffee with Aunt Linda a few times, and my cousin Jessica and I have gotten closer. I used the money I would have spent on the honeymoon to put a down payment on a small house. I moved in last month. Do I feel guilty? Sometimes. Do I miss my family? Yes. But I also feel something I haven't felt in years, respected. I set a boundary, and I kept it, even when it was hard. Even when they tried every manipulation tactic they could think of. My therapist says I did the right thing, that healthy families don't operate through guilt and public pressure. I'm starting to believe her. A few people have asked if I'd ever reconcile with them. Honestly, I don't know. If they apologized, genuinely apologized and acknowledged what they did was wrong, maybe. But I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm focusing on building a life where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. So Reddit, I need your honest thoughts. Did I overreact by walking out and cutting contact? Should I have just paid to keep the peace? Or was standing my ground the right call? Because some days I still second-guess myself, and I could really use some outside perspective on this whole mess.